Hello everybody, Sziasztok. My name is Vincent Liegey, Vincent in English or in Hungarian. I'm happy to be here again tonight in Bolygó for a very special event where we will launch our new book, what we co-direct edited with Anitra Nelson, the Routledge Handbook of Degrowth, and where Logan contributed, and I also work on that chapter for a very wonderful chapter. So first of all, a few words about Bolygó, which is a fantastic community space here in Budapest for young and less young activists around environmental issues and a lot of other issues and so on. And we are very grateful to be here again today. Anitra is one of the key speakers here, because even if you live in Australia, that's already the second time you're here. And it opened a bit more than 2 years ago. And we had the opportunity to work with them on a lot of projects. And I really invite you for both. First, connect with the team of Bolygó, which will be around Panka. The Bolygó team, please show yourself. So after the conversation, we will have some convivial time. So go to talk to them and feel free to follow them on the social networks and see their great programs and so on and join. And secondly, last but not least, also feel free to make donation for them and to support them, because to sustain such a beautiful space, you need some resources. And as you know, we are in a difficult time as alternative movements and so on. And I will speak about that at the end. We also need to get some support, but it's not in competition with Bolygó, because if you buy some of our books and t-shirts, which are in the back, we will be happy to redistribute a very major part to Bolygó, of course. So we are here tonight with Logan Strenchock. Logan is one of maybe I will let both of you introduce yourselves. It's going to make my life easier, and I will do for myself. But Logan is one of my colleagues for more than 10 years in Cargonomia, a degrowth research and experimentation cooperative here in Budapest. Anitra Nelson, with who I co-authored Exploring Degrowth Critical Guide, a book published in 2020 at Pluto Press, and the Routledge Handbook of Degrowth, what I've just spoken about. And what I suggest, we will try to be as brief as possible to let some space for a conversation after, and also some convivial time after we sit, and it's type boring to be sitting in a wonderful weather like today and so on. And I will have only 2 questions for Logan and Anitra and for me, and we will make a round of around both that questions, and then the floor will be yours. I immediately start with you, Logan. So first I will invite you to introduce yourself, but while doing so, also to answer the first question. How did you discover degrowth? What is your definition of degrowth? And what is the most important for you in degrowth? Why did you decide to be so much involved in the degrowth movement?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Vincent. I'm Logan Strenchock. I'm a co-founder of Cargonomia. I'm a garden team member at Zsámbaki Biokert, which is a 3.5-hectare agroecology-inspired, permaculture-inspired organic farm about 1 hour from Budapest. I'm an instructor and the environmental officer at Central European University. When I teach in Vienna, but they still organize a lot of programs here in Budapest. And I'm a member of the governing board of the Hungarian Agroecology Network. So most of my perspective today, the answers to the first question and the answer following are really connected to the lived experience I have both in organizing and managing what we do in Cargonomia, but also the deep embedded experience from that we have gathered in trying to make a small farm work in the current surrounding agricultural environment, economic environment, Central European environment. And to answer this first question, the reasons I got interested in degrowth 15 years ago, I think are still really relevant today. So I was a younger person at that time, concerned with the state of the world, had spent most of the first 18 years of my life growing up in the US, and I finally got a bit smart enough to start putting some of the pieces of the bigger picture together and questioning a lot of the things in which I saw in the society around me, especially the consequences of a consumption-based culture, the consequences of an economic system which encouraged us to compete against each other instead of actually building and working together. And if I would say what was degrowth to me then and what is it to me now, I would break it down into three different pieces. The first is that it's a community, a collection of knowledge, a movement which can offer hope to someone who is not seeing and feeling a lot of hope with the current state of the world. When we talk about permaculture, we say permaculture is a life philosophy that you adopt. One aspect of degrowth is that once you immerse yourself in the actual movement practice and the literature behind it, I like to think of it like a set of, I wouldn't say X-ray goggles, but some type of goggles which you put on and you start to see the reality of the world, the fraud in the world, the exploitation in the background of the way of what it takes to make what we have become comfortable with in modern life. Greenwashing, these type of things. You could start to pick out the wrong directions that we're going in. The good news is that degrowth also offers a set of tools for resistance and a set of tools for reaction to this higher level of awareness. So how can we prepare ourselves to be an active member of a community? How can we prepare ourselves to be more self-sufficient, to resist the systems which we don't want to participate in physically? So I found and have been able to collect a number of really useful tools by immersing myself both deeper in the literature and narratives of degrowth and also its community. And lastly, which is probably the most important, we're human beings in this room. No matter what you might hear or read about us, we're not dictated by our own economic decision-making processes. We're social beings. We like to be around each other. We like to work together. And we're lucky in the case that there are communities of people and organizations and groups of neighbors experimenting together who are really colorful and really open and really welcoming to have new people connect to them. And I found this within the Degrowth Network as well. So I'm not going to give you some concrete definition of what exactly is degrowth in one sentence, but for me it was these three things. The goggles for seeing the realities in the world, a set of tools for resistance and self-sufficiency, and lastly, a really, really vibrant and active community of people who I found success and fulfillment in collaborating with.
Thanks a lot, Logan, for this. Actually, it's quite a substantive, nice definition for degrowth. Anitra, may I ask you the same question? How did you end up with degrowth, and what is your definition of degrowth?
Okay, can everyone hear me? Great, thanks. Well, I first discovered degrowth as a movement back in 2012. I'd been studying environmental matters and been an environmental activist for a decade or so. And so I knew the word degrowth, but not as a living movement in Australia. And I was in New York City as a research fellow at the New School for Social Research, which is a university in New York. And I discovered that there was in Montreal, the first conference of degrowth in the Americas. And so it was easy for me to jump on a train and go to Montreal for a week. And I was absolutely amazed by this conference because it really walked the talk. The conference organisers were 5 collaborating universities, and universities aren't all that good at collaborating, but they popped up the program at different campuses every single day. They catered with lots of local food, dumpster-dived food. There was people like David Suzuki speaking, people from other movements, so it was obviously kind of like a movement that was broadly well networked. I met a lot of people from Europe, and it just so happened that this was in the kind of about 3-month mark of a student protest in Montreal. And there were students who were doing 24/7 marches around the city. And a lot of us, after the conference ended each day around 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, would go out and actually join those activists. So that pretty much sold me on degrowth. I had been involved in many social movements, including peace and women's movements, and as well as environmental movements in Australia. And what I liked about degrowth was it kind of married the environmental interests that I had with interests in social justice and equality. Also, a decade or so before that experience, I'd lived for 10 years in eco-collaborative housing, co-housing, where households are joined together by common areas and do a lot of making common decision-making amongst themselves. So there was also a horizontalism about degrowth, a form of collaborative decision-making that I really liked and was attracted to about degrowth as well. But yes, I'm today, I'm an activist scholar, call myself an activist scholar, which means essentially that the research that I do is married to my passions in terms of politics and my concerns in terms of the environment. And I'm affiliated with the University of Melbourne, which is in the capital city of the most southeastern mainland state of Australia. But I live about 100 kilometres north of that capital city. And there we have a group called Degrowth Central Victoria, with various practical as well as learning experiences involved with our activities. It's an area where there is a lot of permaculture, because one of the co-originators of permaculture, David Holmgren, lives about 30k from where I live. And it's an area that's also well known for people who are concerned about sustainability, climate change, and who are artistic. So in terms of my definition of degrowth, I see degrowth as addressing what are the two main challenges globally to us, and that is over and above skyrocketing carbon emissions. This is really just the tip of the iceberg of the ecological crises that we face. And also we have these growing, increasing inequities across socio-political and economic areas. So I see degrowth as addressing that, understanding that overproduction, which is generic to the capitalist system, and growth as its driver, is one of the things that's perpetually kind of sending us into more unsustainable and less convivial and social kind of climate.
Thanks a lot, Anitra. So I have a very comfortable position because I can ask the question and answer the question. So I ask the same question to myself. So how did I end up to deal with degrowth? Actually, in the beginning, I was coming more from the alter globalist movement in France in the late 1990s. And in France, in this movement to speak about environmental issues, and I say that because today we are in Bolygó, which is one of the key central topics they address, was really not a topic. The concerns were really about social justice, was really about peace, and was really about fighting against imperialism, in particular imperialism coming from the Western world. So it was already this post-development against colonial system that we were living in, that we were fighting and so on. And the life brought me to Hungary in the early 2000s, where I connected with Hungarian alter-globalist movement. And I see Tracy sitting here in the room, who was one of the key actors of that movement at the time. There was a great association called Vededlet, and they were organizing very fantastic, well, I don't remember what was the name you gave, alter-globalist festival in Gödör and so on, and I was very impressed. And I could connect with these young Hungarian alter-globalist activists who were more concerned than I was and my French friends were at the time about environmental issues. And to be honest, my first reaction was a bit like, who cares about the insects or the biodiversity? I didn't really understand about that. I know I see Rebecca saying no, she was also an active member at the time in this movement. And I don't really understand. And I say there are people dying under the US bombs in Middle East. You have people dying in factories around the big exploitation in Global South and so on. And I didn't really understand. And through the connection at the time, I started to connect the dots when somebody talked about Nicolas Georgescu-Roegen, who was an economist from Romania. And as I had hard science, as I was an engineer at the time, and I understood very well physics, Georgescu-Roegen tried to connect the physical laws and economics. And he wrote a famous paper, Back to the Past, and that's how also Roegen became a degrowth pioneer. He wrote a famous paper in the late 1960s called The Entropy Law and the Economic Process. And then through that readings, I started to discover degrowth, and I started to understand that there is no social justice without understanding that all this story is happening on a planet called the Earth, which is also dominated, what I understood very well, physical laws, but also ecological, environmental, energetic type of laws, and so on. So I discovered the degrowth movement. I went back to France. I was very enthusiastic to join the movement. I became immediately the spokesperson of the French Degrowth Party. At the time, we had a degrowth party in France. We participated in, with no success in terms of votes, but a big success in terms of impact and so on. We participated in different types of election. And my life started to be totally in degrowth. And I went back to Hungary. I had the opportunity to co-found with a group of friends, including Logan and Orsi and Liegey and Adri and so on, Cargonomia. And also we co-organized, I see Edina here from Green Independent, we co-organized the 2016 5th International Degrowth Conference here in Budapest, which was a fantastic time with also a parallel Degrowth Week, which was like an open festival all around Budapest in 11 places. It was a bit crazy. We had thousands of concerts and DJs and parties every night. It was very exhausting, but great vibes and great time and so on. And more than 10 years after launching all these type of things, we are still here dealing with degrowth. I also became one of the coordinators of the International Degrowth Conferences, which became something quite impactful and important. The next one will be in a few weeks in Oslo, in Norway, when we will officially launch the Routledge Handbook of Degrowth and so on. And it made my life already for more than 15 years centered and only around degrowth. So it's quite funny. I'm getting a bit old to repeat always the same, but still with a lot of good fun. And also very enthusiastic, because I think in the time of COVID and after COVID, there was really a good, great dynamics around degrowth, and a lot of young people started to join degrowth, including the one sitting there who will be selling you later books and T-shirts, who are our Cargonomia interns. And I go to the second part of the question, because it's a bit long to speak about this journey. What is degrowth? But it's totally, I would say, it's totally connected to that. For me, degrowth, it means hope and enjoyment of life and solidarity. And I had the chance within the degrowth movement, within some great organization and collectives and projects here in Budapest, to have a large part of my life in this collapsing world, to be surrounded by these good feelings and good atmosphere. And if I join degrowth from the physical limits to growth through Georgescu-Roegen and the notion of entropy, the fact that infinite growth on a finite planet is something which is not possible, unfortunately, what was more like a prediction and a theory 20 years ago has become a reality. We are facing the beginning of environmental maybe collapse. Think about climate change, biodiversity loss. We are really playing with the fire, and the situation is very alarming. But I would say that degrowth, what was very interesting for me, is that it immediately connected it with more anthropological questions. Coming from this question that even if infinite growth on a finite planet would be possible, and we know that it's not possible, but if it was possible, still, would it be something I would follow? Would it be something which will make sense? And I really believe, no. I really believe that this world is not only unsustainable, I believe that this model of society is undesirable. For the reason what Anitra mentioned about social justice, it's a world about exploitation, a minority exploiting the majority, destroying the planet, exploitation about global north, global south, unbalance, and this post-colonial system. And actually, degrowth started, I think, around a great event in 2002 in France, in UNESCO, and around post-development under the name Destroy Development, Rebuild the World, with voices coming from Global South that we don't want your development. Development bring a type of Western imperialistic narrative to keep on going on a post-colonial economic model, and I think we should, and degrowth should, and degrowth brings that, and in the book we have a lot of chapters about that, brings the Global South voices, bringing other type of views of what is good life. And for me, degrowth is really about that, and bringing all this philosophy, all this deconstruction of what we call toxic concepts, like economicism. We live in a world dominated by GDP and maximization of GDP, and a world dominated by economic indicators, which are making us blind toward what really matters. There is that fantastic sentence of Mark Twain: if you have a hammer in your head, you see all the problem looking like nails. In our Western world, we see all the problem looking like economic questions. So degrowth is about decolonizing our economicist, economic imaginary, and to start to question the world with much more qualitative and complex questions. What are really our basic needs, and how to fulfill our basic needs, of course, in a sustainable way, but even more in a convivial, autonomous, shared, caring dimension. And degrowth is also questioning the role of technologies in our society, and as an engineer, it's something which was always a question what I didn't understand till I read about degrowth. We see nowadays how we develop fantastic, powerful type of technologies and technical infrastructure, what we are totally alienated to, where it was supposed to liberate ourselves. And degrowth is about questioning what kind of technology we use, how do we reappropriate convivial tools, convivial technologies, and so on. We also have a chapter about that in the book. And last but not least, I couldn't continue like that, I think degrowth is really about autonomy. It's really about democracy. It's really about another type of democracy, not the one which has become really dysfunctional, which is unfortunately limited only to election and the party system. And I think it's still a good tool what we should preserve and protect, because it's no under destruction, but it should be accompanied with much more deliberative, direct democratic types of processes around the common, around creativity and hope. So to conclude for me, degrowth, and it will be my definition, it's really, and on that I join Logan, it's really how to reappropriate hope in a collapsing civilization where we have a lot of good reasons to be desperate and to be depressed, but degrowth is bringing this sunshine and is opening new pathways which are already here, which can show that the solutions are maybe here, and not so much is needed to make a step aside to construct this new world, which will be much more desirable about enjoyment of life. So I jump on my second question. Logan, you said that you're coming from US, which is maybe the country which went the furthest in this growth paradigm, in this growth model of society. You've been in US a few weeks ago, and you could see the situation there and so on. What is your perspective from US, now living in Europe for 15 years or even more? I don't know exactly. You can precise. What is your perspective about degrowth? What do you think is important in degrowth? What do you think about degrowth as a central tool or not to address the very challenge what we face, to address the political situation what we have here in Hungary, in a lot of European countries, in US. What is also, you spoke about different dimension of degrowth, the dimension which is for you the most important?
Okay, big question to answer. So just to start with the point from the perspective of the US. So a lot of production systems, whether we talk about agriculture, conventional agriculture, mechanized agriculture, to shopping, to personal mobility through owning an individual vehicle or multiple vehicles for individual persons. A lot of these perfect tools of profit accumulation have been a product of the economic environment in the US. And this is something that a model that has been exported or has spread, a disease that has spread, if I want to use harsher words, across the rest of the world, or has been somehow imposed in a way that certain people and places think that until they reach this level of ability or empowerment through conspicuous consumption, that they haven't really reached the top level. So these are what I can say is, this all sounds like pretty bad side of things. It's coming from, as far as what are the biggest exports of the US, it's not necessarily the actual concrete products, it's this way of thinking and the sets of pressures it puts on people. But I also don't want to only speak bad about the historic impacts of this industrialist, capitalist ideology coming from the US, because some of the foundational resistance movements, which existed before there was a word degrowth, have also been birthed of this society of pressure and exploitation on its own people. So we can look back to workers' movements, civil rights movements, gender equality movements, even the birth of the modern environmental movement, also springing and sprouting from this particularly destructive general environment. So moving on to what do I see as some of the most practical steps. What can degrowth achieve? I'll kind of take my authority to change it to that question, because I hope that we get these. I'm waiting for your questions, and I think they'll be much more interesting or to talk about, maybe debate. Yeah. What does degrowth need to do? Well, if we're going to be talking, it's not a cult, it's not a religion. And as someone who is interested in degrowth and participates in the conferences and also talks about it in front of a public audience, I will have you know, I'll be one of the biggest critics of the progress of the where degrowth stands right now. Because I think people who are influenced by degrowth and trying to influence others through degrowth and some of its historic successes and narratives have a big responsibility, because we actually need to show and build in practice what we expect others to not only follow, but follow and be happy and fulfilled from. And that's a good challenge, because it's a good challenge for all of us to think of what we define as well-being. I make a direct connection between my personal well-being and doing things that I see as meaningful with people that I care about, and also helping these people who I work and interact with directly live in a way in which they could satisfy most or nearly all of the needs, their basic needs for being happy and fulfilled, with the resources that they or we have around us. So to switch it back to some of the more complex terminology that might be used in academic circles or even in degrowth circles, I would say this is a process of decommodification of our own lives. I can try to use a more simpler term and say to find abundance socially and abundance in a resource way, but in a very localized manner. So this starts with knowing or relearning how to grow most of the food that we eat, how to build and repair the things that we need for everyday life, how to interpret and acknowledge alternative forms of mobility. First, we could think on a day-to-day basis, like doing more with human-powered mobility, but we could also think beyond that as far as how to rethink the necessity to travel, and if we do travel, do it in a way which is a more, less energy-intense and emissions-based travel option. But we can branch this type of thinking out to not just food production because I work on a farm, or bikes because we're a cargo bicycle cooperative, but this branches into other sectors like education and care and healthcare, certainly, and even shelter or housing as well. So what we need to do is or we can call ourselves, people carrying the degrowth flag, is be able to work on projects which spread these skills to more people, and which through this development of new skills also helps people find a sense of empowerment so that they could escape the pressures which are put on them. And when I talk about pressures put on people born into a society, I think the same way across the board, someone born in the US or someone born in a historically exploited part of the world is born into a society which a lot of pressures are put on them, which basically removes their inborn intuition as a curious social human and enforces a lot of pressures on them that if they don't achieve this level of financial earning, that they won't be able to protect themselves. So it's our job, it's our responsibility to reconnect the degrowth movement and our work to the active work of practitioners who are creating communities, developing good communication tools, and to acknowledge these movements as, whether they call themselves degrowthers or not, an essential part in helping spread these ideas into wider ranges of society.
Thanks, Logan. I noted the transition to Anitra decommodification, because Anitra wrote a very fantastic book about beyond money, but maybe you don't want to speak about that now. Anitra, your views about degrowth, know how it should and can play a central role or not in the challenges that we face?
Yes, well, I'd like to pretty much focus on the Routledge Handbook of Degrowth in answering this question. So before I was approached by Routledge to put effort into editing a handbook on degrowth, I'd co-edited two smaller handbooks, one called Housing for Degrowth and the other one called Food for Degrowth. And so one of the attractive aspects of being asked to edit a collection of chapters which could be read by students, which could be read by people just wanting to know more about degrowth, people who are interested because it's an important policy question now, was actually sort of framing the way in which we would introduce people to degrowth. And so we designed a collection of 35 chapters into 4 kind of parts. The first part we've talked a bit about already, and that's really the kind of world that we live in today that calls for a movement such as degrowth. So the social metabolism, the social ecology of just using so many more materials and energy in 2025 from when I was born back in the 1950s. By 1970, we as a human species started to, through our production and consumption, tip the balance over from having sustainable ways of living to unsustainable ways of living. And of course, what we've discussed is that talking about it in a general way like that is a little obscure, because there's been a lot more overproduction by people in the global north than in the global south. And in many of our nations, in Australia, we've got over 100,000 people who are homeless. So these kinds of inequities are spread right through the whole system. So in that first section, we've got 3 chapters. One is about the materials and energy overuse and the sectors that are contributing to that. It's also, there's an exploration of the inequities. And finally, talking about the politics of 21st century movements that are so embedded in autonomy. Then in the second part of the collection, we do something which hasn't really been done by any of the handbooks on degrowth before, and that is we take a kind of geographic history of degrowth in different areas, starting in France, but also going right through to Africa and Latin America, and in between that, looking at Italy, Germany, Greece, and Czech Republic. So just to give a kind of sense of the rich variety that degrowth as a movement and as a set of scholars and researchers and writers has produced. In the third section, we're really interested in unpacking the practices that come out of some of the concepts that have been used, like convivial technology, frugal abundance, looking at commoning, and topics such as degrowth donut, how degrowth approaches the health sector or the whole health area in terms of different practices. Then finally, we have a section that is the biggest one, and that's on degrowth futures, and we've got people looking at utopia. We're looking at the way that ecofeminism has both contributed strongly to degrowth but also challenges it in a variety of ways. Similarly, eco-socialism. There's a geopolitical chapter that's looking at ways in which nations could be remodelling the non-aligned movement so that we're addressing demilitarisation, which I think is a really important aspect of degrowth. There's 55 co-authors have contributed to these 35 chapters, and I was doing a rough back of the envelope calculation today, and I think that's about 1,000 years of people who, you know, research and writing years that people have been involved. So there's, we've tried to make this a kind of collection that would take a lot of rich knowledge and express it in palatable ways. We instructed all of the authors not to make just simply abstract and theoretical statements, but always to be trying to unpack that in very practical ways. And we both read all the first drafts of the chapters, and we really did push all of the authors, and they were very good in coming up with the goods. There's a really important chapter that both of you contributed to that is about the ways in which there has developed kind of splits between practitioners who've got so much to offer and whose prefigurative practices, that is, practices that are trying to experiment with ways in which we could all actually live in the future, have been to some extent ignored by various academics who have a tendency to look at modelling and policy, and these are the kinds of areas, unfortunately, that funders prefer to finance. amongst the kinds of challenges, therefore, within the degrowth movement are aspects like that also align to some extent with variations and directions between degrowth activists who are working very much at a grassroots level and those who are working with more of a state or market sort of focus and top down. And there's always a stretch and tensions between global north and global south kind of tendencies. So maybe I'll leave it at that, because I really think that probably it'd be good if people can ask us questions.
No, thanks, Anitra. I think it gives a very interesting perspective from, and we have to underline that, from all the continents. So there are degrowth discussion happening everywhere in the world with different type of approaches, of course. And it's something we can also observe in the degrowth movement, where the International Degrowth Network just launched a call for local events. And it's a very modest call, and we got 54 applications from all around the world as well, from Uruguay, from Rwanda, from India, from Taipei, from Tokyo, from a lot of places in Europe, also from Hungary. I mean, the secret Bolygó also applied, but they are not the only one. And it's very interesting to see this dynamic, and I think the handbook, and it was very interesting to have the opportunity to be one of the co-editors, and thanks Anitra for inviting me to do that. One of the co-editors of that handbook, because we could very easily, with no stress, no stupid debates, but we could see that the same common pillars were shared by 55 co-authors, around 35 chapters from all around the world, to have a very fruitful conversation. And the book is showing that. And I think degrowth is one, not the only, but one of the interesting movements who could bring interesting answers toward the challenge what we face now. I will go through 2 points to answer this question. About my vision about degrowth in this actual situation is, first, whether you like it or not, this is the end of growth. We live in a model of society which is addicted to growth, and you can see how politicians, economists, and so on are desperately looking for growth in the last year. It's not breaking news, but in the last decade in Europe, there was no growth. But still, we speak about that. So we are desperately looking for growth. Whether you listen to Mr. Orban, to Mr. Macron, to Mrs. von der Leyen, Mr. Trump, or Mr. Biden, his predecessor, and so on, these people, they have only one mindset, which is growth, because the economic model we are living in, but also the cultural model we are addicted to, it's a type of religion, is about growth. And there is no growth anymore, and there will be even less, whatever the indicator you look at. There is no space anymore for more economic growth. Even from a perspective of demographic growth, we are about to reach a peak. So we are at the end of a type of adventure which started with the Industrial Revolution, which constructed a very dominant mindset, imaginary, and also type of institution we need growth to survive, called capitalism, neoliberalism, and so on. The society we are living in without growth is facing a lot of tragedies and so on. And degrowth is offering, first, a very interesting analysis why this is the end of growth, why it's not a bad news, what we need to move out of growth for environmental reasons. And also it's not a bad news because to move out of growth is the best way to address inequalities, for example. We also have a chapter in the book from Olivier de Scooters, who is a United Nations High Reporter on poverty, who reached the conclusion as a reporter of United Nations that the best way to address high poverty in Global South is to move out of growth, in particular in Global North, to redistribute, to produce better, to produce more local, to create other type of solidarities in all the territories and so on. And also to stop with this growth model of society, which is that promise that the only way to be happy on this planet is to follow the way of life of the richest people. So To move out of growth is a good news. It's a good news for well-being because above a certain level, economic growth is not bringing any more wealth, well-being. It's not bringing any more subjective well-being. On the contrary, it destroys well-being. I mean, we can see United States, all the social, cultural indicators are really frightening, which is also still a nice country with a lot of nice people and a lot of nice stories, facing a very frightening problems. Also, if I look at France, which is more developed than Hungary, the situation is not better than in Hungary from a lot of perspective and so on. So this is the end of growth. But about that, we are facing a type what I call asymmetric war. I speak about ideological, cultural, political war, where on one hand, you have a minority of people around an oligarchy who are very powerful, because in a capitalistic society, if you own wealth, if you own the money, you have a lot of power. And this minority doesn't have any interest in neither opening the debate of degrowth, nor implementing it. Because degrowth is about redistributing. It's about challenging the power dynamics we have in our society. In every society and also between the countries, between the region, between global north, global south. It's about this social justice and so on. And growth has been, in the last decades, what made people accept inequalities. Till you had the promise of growth, you could accept inequalities because tomorrow, even the poorest people could access to the same wealth than the richest people. There is no growth anymore. This narrative is not working anymore. Which means that we have to challenge this oligarchy, but it's an asymmetrical war because the level of power around them, when they buy medias, when they buy social networks and their algorithm, when they finance massively advertisement and marketing. So they have a lot of powerful tools to colonize our imaginaries, to decide what are the key topics we debate or not. So all the political debates in France or in Hungary or maybe in US are about migration and not about the key questions. If you look at what are the topics which are the most interesting or the main concerns of the people, you will find all the things you have behind degrowth, and they are never in the center of the political discussion, which are driven by these medias, owned by this oligarchy and so on. So this minority also started to buy editors, publishers, started to interfere in research, started to buy or appropriate universities, research centers, grants, and so on. Of course, they decide where you put money for research and development for large corporations. They decide that we will put the collective effort on going to Mars, going to develop artificial intelligence, and not to do something else. Where these minorities deciding for us is destroying democracy and so on, there are a lot of good reasons to have hope, because in this asymmetric war, you find majorities on this planet, everywhere in the world, who would adhere, who would aspire to follow the degrowth principles. You have a very large convergence of interesting surveys, studies, showing that people would rather choose degrowth, which will mean to consume less but better, to share more, to slow down, to focus more on what really matters, care about each other, care about the children, do meaningful things and move out of the bullshit job, producing things what we don't really need and so on. Majorities are there. Also, the solutions are there. Logan spoke about a lot of fantastic, and also in your books, the degrowth housing books, the degrowth for food books, and so on. There are a lot of already existing alternatives everywhere in the world of citizens where in their daily life they already explore what could be degrowth societies based on other principles, based on the commons, based on solidarity, based on sharing, based on caring, and so on. Also, even in a very highly capitalistic, productivist model of society, a large part of our life are still around degrowth principles. Just it's made invisible by the dominant system. We would always put the focus on something else, and we will always try to avoid the key debates and so on. We have interesting example on what I'm saying, that majorities would rather choose degrowth, which are empirical example, which is all the citizen assemblies around climate and other topics which have been implemented. There was a famous one in France after the Yellow Vest movement, escalation of police repression and violence made by Macron. We implemented a type of assembly where 150 citizens were randomly chosen and had to address the question of climate change and social justice. They ended up with 150 well-articulated political solutions and proposals, which were much more meaningful and radical than any reports written by experts in the last decades, which are totally in line with what you find in the degrowth literature for more than 20 years. And this type of assemblies, randomly choosing people, have been experimented in a lot of other places, also in Hungary, in Budapest, for example. And wherever you implement it, you never have a group of citizens, randomly chosen one more time, who end up with, oh, it's going to be great to keep on going with green growth, which doesn't work. And then when after we destroy everything, we go to another planet and we do again the same. There was no demonstration nowhere in the world, I spoke about the Yellow Vest movement, saying, going to the street, what we need, it's autonomous electric car. What we need is artificial intelligence or 5G. People, they want decency, solidarity, dignity, good life, security. And security, which is, I think, a fundamental concept appropriated by the far right. Security is about food security. It's about security toward climate. It's about family security and so on. And me, on one hand, I'm very depressed to see that, unfortunately, in this asymmetric war, a minority managed to take control on a lot of very powerful infrastructure, tools, media, social network, etc. No through fake or distorted type of election also to take the power on public institutions, democratic institutions, in destroying them and so on. But on the contrary, I'm full of hope to see that minorities are ready and willing to move to something else, and based on a lot of surveys, under two conditions which were in the heart of degrowth from the beginning: social justice, to translate it very in a simple word, it means that the richer you are, the more you have to make an effort, so you have to distribute, and democracy. People want to be involved in more direct, deliberative democracy, and that's where we are now with degrowth. So thank you for your input. I hope we brought some fruits for a powerful and interesting conversation. And from now on, the floor is yours. I suggest that we take a series of 3 questions, and then we will try to address your questions. Do we have microphone for the public? Yeah, so we give that one. No? Yeah, start it and...
Thank you all for sharing your food of thought. So I have a question for all of you. Since you started the degrowth movement, I think all of you more than a decade ago, do you see a brighter future? And if the answer is yes or no, what inspires you to keep going? And that inspiration can be used for others to join or keep going as well.
Hello. It was very interesting what you said. I read the contents of the forthcoming book, and also as you described it, it seems to be a very complex overview of whatever happened so far. My question is more practical. I am interested in that too, as far as your knowledge goes, or your experiences and your wishes, if I can say, you can point out a couple of practical neighborhood level real happenings. So we have environmental movements and housing movements and all kinds of things, but it's not necessarily degrowth. Can you pinpoint anything anywhere in the world which you would consider like a nucleus of a future model? Okay?
Do we have a third question somewhere? Yeah, sure. Okay, sorry, I didn't see you.
Yes, thank you. Do you think degrowth can be achieved through policy and electing politicians, or is it just like avoiding the worst? And we should rather focus on designing alternative lifestyles and economy? Thank you.
Very good 3 questions, which are somehow complementary. I suggest, we can give you the floor after. I suggest we start to address the 3 questions. We want to start, Logan? Sure. The microphone here.
So the first question is, I'll interpret it as, do we think we made any progress? So I just, like most of the people in this room, my eyes are open, I'm reading all the time. News is something that overwhelms you when you hear more about what is happening with a changing climate, and also what is happening in the actual physical and mental violence which is spread across the world, and that's pretty overwhelming. What gives me hope in this current time? So I think I won't give all the credit to the official degrowth movement, but the hard science behind degrowth has made its way into public discussions. That's one checkbox we can say. But perhaps for me, the most impactful impact is that this, both hard science and theoretical approaches, has also impacted the current generation of people who are getting close to the point where they're gonna become active citizens, potential leaders, potential employees, and they can see through the nonsense which was presented in the last 25 years of sustainable development and call out the deficiencies in a lot of what is being proposed. And many of these people are, if they're lucky enough and have the privilege to be in an educational environment, they're questioning what they're getting served to them in the university, in the institutions. I think there's other people outside of institutions who are choosing completely different career pathways than they may have a number of years ago. And this is still a really bold choice to choose this alternative pathway, because one thing that you're gonna likely sacrifice is an easier path to financial security. And one thing that I personally adopt myself and in the projects we're connected to is to try to give opportunities for these people to find other ways to make a living, to make connections, to gain skills during this crucial time. And we have a number of other people in this room who are current members of our team, but full members of our team. There are trainees, and they're perfect examples of these smart, really intelligent young people who are questioning the things that they see around them and looking to build them skills so that they can react to it. And I think most of the other people in this room today who maybe aren't our trainees are probably fit into this category as well. So that gives me hope. Or when I am overwhelmed with the futility, that's something I at least try to focus my thoughts back to. The second question, which I think was like, I forget what the question was exactly, but what are some of the local examples which we can cite? And I'll just mention 2. So you might not think of Hungary as the most active from a culture of volunteerism perspective, or most active from a reactionary planning, the B plan, the way out, and implementing it. But there's a really creative and inspiring movement of farmers interested by agroecology, who in the last few years have developed more solidarity-based interactions. If someone who was an agricultural historian, they would tell you that farmers don't work together because they learned farming under socialism, and under socialism, if you had something that was working well, you didn't share your secrets with others because they would steal it from you and then you wouldn't be successful. That's not the case anymore. We mentioned a few times in our discussion artificial intelligence and mechanization, and at some point we have a big political project to decide what are the jobs the humane jobs, the fulfilling jobs, the respectable jobs, which we want human beings to be doing in the future, especially ones which have good health benefit, social benefit, communal benefit. And we need to build a future where farming is a respectable and desirable job. And at least, I know it's a hard job. We will tell you, any farmer who's actually trying to make a living from this in the current economic environment would tell you, I can understand why it's not so attractive to people. But that's one of the things that, there are a lot of examples of people are showing this is a potentially attractive future, not for everyone, but for more people. Another set of projects I would cite are the numerous projects which happen in Hungary, which are focusing on continuing adult education and training, helping adults, or we can say people who were maybe went to school or went to a professional technical school for some sort of skill and are now kind of feeling pretty left out of the current economic system, so we could say lost their job, or are looking to unplug themselves from a repetitive, mindless task which they don't see any benefit in and don't enjoy doing. There's a few of these projects, not necessarily coming from the top down, but organized by Hungarian civil society, which I really, really respect, and they're helping adults transition into career pathways which assist them on this way of creating a new path for themselves. And there are two movements, if we had more time or want to continue the discussion afterwards, but there are good examples here, amongst a huge, huge amount of challenges as well. But we acknowledge these challenges, but we can focus, at least for this part of the discussion tonight, on the positive examples. And I'll leave it to Vincent and Anitra to chime in on politics, because I know that's their favorite subject. Maybe if I think something's missing, I'll chime in at the end.
Anitra.
Thanks. Okay then. I actually did all my undergraduate work in Latin American studies, and I did a PhD in revolutionary studies. And one of the things that I learned from looking at the history of the Russian, Chinese, Mexican and Cuban revolutions was that all of those countries had lived under very dark times right up to the revolution. And the histories all repeat the same question, you know, how did this happen? And they all look back into precursors and this, that and the other. But it taught me that there's no useful analysis or prediction of when and how revolutions happen. I lived kind of through the 1960s, 1970s, where I believe that the primary change was among ordinary people in terms of saying, no, we want the world to be a better place. So I have hope to some extent because I believe that we're facing massive challenges, and I have an instinct that there will be, and there already is, in movements like degrowth, and there are multiple different movements. All of you are working towards and extremely concerned about the environment, and I do think this is massive focus that's necessary, and I think that change can happen. In terms of kind of practical examples of degrowth, in 2018, which was the year that our Housing for Degrowth collection came out, I'd written a book that was just sole-authored called Small is Necessary, Shared Living on a Shared Planet. And degrowth is not mentioned there at all. You can't find degrowth in the index, but it is actually all about degrowth. And what it's looking at is eco-collaborative housing, that's co-housing, political squats, eco-villages, a whole range of alternative forms of housing that not only and I just took the best practice examples because, of course, amongst all of these models, there are ones that are contradictory and don't express things like really good models of democratic decision-making. The best practices ones have that. They have experimentation in terms of more sustainable living, smaller spaces per capita, but shared spaces, which not only make up for the smaller per capita spaces, but actually enrich the households that are living together. These experiments, these co-housing experiments, often, and in terms of best practice, always have a characteristic of outreach. So they're really involved in their neighbourhoods and their local communities. So in Australia, for instance, Co-Housing Australia has a model of co-housing being like an umbrella or the large kind of overarching tree that protects a lot in its ecological environment. These are examples of where people are not just exploring degrowth and practicing degrowth, but they also just see themselves as their primary motive is actually to live better and to have different models for their children. But they work at so many different levels. If one can imagine them as cells and all interconnecting as networks, you can see there ways in which these models can spread and not upscale, but rather outscale and reproduce one another. In terms of hope and other kinds of ways in which degrowth has itself grown, there's been 2 European Commission forums in which degrowth movement has had provocative but I think constructive discussions with policymakers. And the second last chapter of the Degrowth Handbook has a chapter by Anitra de Wever and Lena Hartog. And Anitra de Wever spoke at the last European Commission Forum, and she's in her early 20s. And she basically said to the Commission, if you can't solve these problems, please hand them over to us. And I believe that we have a lot of energy and we have young people who are sensitive and intelligent, and I believe that these people are going to be able to really help change the world. It's just one extra thing, and it's a very practical thing. The handbook on degrowth that we've been talking about hasn't been published yet, and it'll come out at the end of June. It's open access, which it was very important for both of us. We said that we wouldn't devote time and energy on something unless everyone in the world could easily access it. So we've made that available. And my book, Small is Necessary, Shared Living on a Shared Planet, is also open access. These are the sorts of practical things that degrowth activists try and walk the talk.
Yes, thanks, Anitra, which is not a good business for us, but we are degrowth, so it's okay. Now, quickly, 3 points to reflect on this great question, which are, I think, very interconnected. So first, actually, there are 300,000 years of degrowth experimentation and life on this planet through the Homo sapiens, our ally species. And we had to start to speak about degrowth only because few idiots started to engage our civilization into this hubris, into this self-destructive growth model of society. But if you look at history of civilization, and still on this very planet right now, even if we are reaching more than 8 billion people living, the large majority of these 8 billion people living, which is every day a new record of Homo sapiens living at the same time on this planet, the large majority are living in this mindset of growth, or majority. But the large majority of cultures on this planet are living outside of the growth mindset. There are around 7,000 languages still spoken around on this planet, and only around 200 are in our mindset, including China, India, and so on. So we are a minority of Homo sapiens for who we have to address degrowth. And to answer your question, the fact that degrowth is more a tense and discussed topic now than it was 20 years ago or in the 1970s and so on, it's a bad news. It means that it's important to speak about degrowth. So the main goal of degrowth is to become obsolete, that we stop talking about it, because it's clear for everybody that to follow growth is absurd. We don't do that anymore. What most of the civilization in history were doing around moderation, around sobriety, around temperance, around a very key concept, what you find in every civilization culture, but a few, including the one who are dominating just right now. But there is this fantastic law called the Law of Gabor. I don't know if you know the Law of Gabor. It's from Danish Gabor, if I remember well, who was the Nobel Prize of Physics from Hungary. And he says that everything which can be experimented, human being will do. And I will say everything stupid. There will always be an Elon Musk or an idiot like that who will push to do it. The problem is that now they are highly powerful, and with oil and so on, they can engage the whole planet into their self-destructive experimentation. Which brings me to my third point, a bit reflecting on your question about how to move on. And I think here we have to, I don't know how to start. So in one of my last articles, I wrote that in this very moment, there are 3 steps we should work in. First, to survive, because there is no point to make a better planet for all if we are not there anymore. So we have first to survive. And when I speak about survive, of course, I speak about survive in a self-destructive dynamic about the environment, survive in societies which are more and more repressive. So we have almost daily, or at least every week, green activists who are assassinated, in particular in South America, and very often fighting against development of mines or type of industry for the so-called green transition in the Western world. But I would say also survive psychologically, survive emotionally. It's very difficult to be degrowth in a system which is dominated by absurd growth narrative. And to do so, it's really the second point about resistance, which starts with to connect. So Bolygó is a good example. Don't be alone with that questions. Go to Bolygó, to a lot of different type of places and connect with other people. To open this discussion, to find some type of places where you could be good. It's also part of your question, why are we still doing it? Because we really enjoy doing it. It's a lot of pain, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of challenge. Sometimes you wake up in the morning, say, why the hell I don't take a bullshit job, and I stop thinking, and I get my salary and I have my holidays and so on. But yeah, we will be even more depressed. So it's not easy, but to connect and do things, you find yourself, you find back with yourself and so on. But resist is also to reappropriate spaces, places, maybe municipalities, territories, where we can, our economic system, or resources, what we can share, and we can start to explore how to have other type of governance through the commons and so on. So it's to participate through resistance. I think we should avoid as much as possible type of direct opposition, because if you start to go in too much direct opposition, in this asymmetric war, you will be eliminated, either economically, legally, or physically. So you have to be very smart. And Hungarian, historically, I learned a lot here. I've been always very subtle and very smart in finding ways to survive and to resist and to still be there under foreign occupation with an improbable, wonderful language that I'm still trying to learn, etc., etc. So to resist, and third, and I reach your point, to be ready. And I totally agree with Anitra. We are in a type of dynamics where things could change very quickly, very fast, anywhere, at any time, or not. We don't know. It could happen tomorrow. Hungary tomorrow could wake up. Tomorrow Hungary could wake up and it's great to go to degrowth and go to degrowth, or enclose itself in decades of very dark time. And it's the case for everywhere. And maybe both could happen on every territory. And to be ready, it's to be ready with already existing solution, what we are experimenting in our daily life, alternative ways of life, good techniques, good economic system, good democratic practices, and so on, which are already here. I mean, we have all these solutions, and also a set of different type of policies. You may find it also in the book. I wrote a book years ago. I won't speak about it now, just to reassure you, you know, about a degrowth project, about some economic transformation of the society, which will be necessary through democratic processes around what we call a unconditional autonomy allowance, which will mean to give from birth to death to all the citizens unconditionally what is necessary to have a decent dignity life, and to discuss, I mean, it's a pretext to discuss what are our basic needs and how to fulfill our basic needs in every territory. And through also a different type of economic reforms about social justice, redistribution, question inheritance, question property rights, to go to more commoning and other type of direct democratic governance, and also big debates about the economic system we are living in particular the question of central bank, public and private debts, debts above the economy, money creation, tax evasion, you say it like that in English, yeah? All these type of things that we have to address. So you have in degrowth a lot of policies, and some of them are in the book, much less in that book, more in exploring degrowth, the former one we write, and also about political strategies. So survive, resist, and be ready. Let's take a last series of 3 questions, and after we can continue in a more convivial dynamic in standing, walking, and so on. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I have too many questions, but I will try to to choose just one. So I felt you very optimistic, and I'm very happy about it. Thank you for this. But I have an unpleasant feeling that I meet every time the same kind of persons. And these are the same, I mean, not the same ones, but like me, we are interested in these questions, and we are convinced there's a general awareness about it. But there are, although, 2 systems, the general one, I mean the systemic one, about the unlimited growth and so on. And on the other hand, there are we, so those little circles of freedom. But how can we break this glass ceiling? I don't know if we use it in English, it's plafond verre, so I'm not sure about the terminology. So I feel that there is a kind of border or a kind of glass ceiling between the 2 words. And I'm very happy, and thank you for your optimism. I don't share for the moment, but maybe by multiplying all those little circles of freedom, as you were talking about, maybe it will be the revolution, and we have to be ready, and thank you for this optimistic note.
Thank you. Oh my God. So my question is more practical, and maybe the answer is in one of the books you mentioned. And it concerns more the European context and how degrowth is applicable here. So here in Europe, the healthcare, the education, the social system all depends on the state. the free education, the free healthcare, what we receive. But the state is highly dependent on the growth and the economy of the countries. So all of these, what we have access to, is dependent on economic growth. And what's the answer of degrowth for this, to still provide education and healthcare for people?
Oh, thank you. There have been questions about policy on like an EU level, and some about what you can do like at a very local, like community level. And my question would be, is what kind of opportunities do you see that could be taken at like a local governmental level that are really suited to that kind of work? So like, for example, in this district, what could be, you know, a way to go? Thank you.
Thanks for all the questions. To respond briefly to the first one, and this is something I think we should all be aware of. We're here in the center of a cosmopolitan capital having this discussion. Maybe many of us work here, study here, are active here. We all have a responsibility to break down our own fears and isolation from everything that is not in the cosmopolitan city. And that's both in our work and in our projects as well. And I grew up in a village. Then when I got to the point in my life and when I had to try to study and make something of myself, then I kind of switched to doing this and studying and starting to work in an urban environment. And when I got past that point, I found that there's great benefit in spending physical time and working physically in communities, some of them urban and some of them peri-urban or not urban as well. And when you do this, you'll find there are base values which link these groups of people, and we can find a common language, especially if we're talking about political challenges and finding understanding and working towards certain political transition. We need to address this distance that currently exists, somewhat physically, but more so imagined in our mind. And we can figure out ways to do this. And one of the best ways to do it is to spend more time with communities outside of these cosmopolitan capitals, which offer us so much distractions, entertainment, everything at our fingertips. And that would positively impact your ability to communicate with very different types of people, different demographics, different backgrounds, different ages. And we need this, and it's essential for all of our projects. The second question, which was related to, the remnants of the socialist aspects of European states. Luckily, a lot of these are still here, even if in some cases they're not performing as well as we would like them to. As someone who grew up in the US, coming to Europe, and the reality that we have a fairly decent public transport system, which could help me get from Budapest to Oslo without flying at the end of June. It will be long, but it exists. I hope I arrive as well. The fact that if I drop myself out of a helicopter from the US and I'm riding a cargo bike from Cargonomia and I have a small accident and I break my leg, even here in Hungary, I will be taken to a hospital and given some sort of care. When I travel back to my own home country, and if the same thing happens to me, I don't know what would happen to me. I'd probably get a big bill for how much it would cost to fix my leg before they actually fix my leg, and this is scary. So we still have some of the remnants of a state operating in a social care-based system, but they're very distracted by being forced into playing the game of speculation to spend most of their money when it should be diverted to these public welfare benefiting systems. So this is part of the political project as well, to encourage, to remind our decision makers what we want them to be siphoning their resources to, which they're mostly collecting from us through taxation, of what is meaningful to us, what is meaningful for us. This is where, without an existing mechanisms for accessible communal deliberation on these, it's hard to feel like you have a voice to participate and express these. But where we see these sprinkles of experimentation, even here in Hungary, certainly happening in different districts in Budapest, we need to functionally participate in these systems so that our voice is heard and so that we have a decision-making power in how resources are shared, and hope that this travels up to the higher level so that we're not just, the legacy of socialist support systems in Europe aren't further degraded by state competition against each other, especially if the idea of the future of the European Union starts to become weaker, and then we truly turn into a country versus country, neighbor versus neighbor competition level again. But that's something we can keep our focus on. And the last question, which talked about, okay, we had high level, we had really ground level, who are the other players? I really believe in the transformative power of territories and regions and municipalities. And we see some of the best, if you look through the research which has been documenting the decision-making power of regions, they've done some of the most aggressive and successful campaigns, especially related to some big topics like water conservation or biodiversity enhancement. And I believe in this type of municipalism and even this giving the independence for territories to start to allow to not only make different decisions, but have the resources to create a strategy for soil conservation within a county, for example, in Hungary. Definitely in the future, as soon as possible, we need to start thinking about water conservation and soil preservation. And this is something that, without it being the most controversial subject that to be attacked in the media or something like that, I think municipalities, even at the one village level or at the county level, can start to address these type of things. And regions can also specifically address what we consider to be commons, or the tools, the spaces, the resources that all citizens should have access to and not need to pay for. And this is something that we can look through international and local-based projects to show that they've had a lot of success in these as well. But I believe in the power of regions and municipalities as well.
Thanks. I'll keep my what I say short. So, because I, agree with a lot of what Logan has said. Certainly, like the evidence is that it's at the municipal level that sustainability and climate action have been strongest throughout the world. This is just like accepted. In terms of the state and the market, I think that we're not only seeing the dark side of the market, but just also the dark side of the state. And I think that this municipalism, to some extent, grows out of the lack of progress or development that the state can actually make. And I think that this has a lot to do with problems of size, and gets back to sort of, Schumacher's argument about small being beautiful. But also there's a much greater recognition amongst urbanists nowadays, just in terms of talking about human scale, in terms of buildings, in terms of massive infrastructure and this kind of thing. So looking at local in terms of greater ecological coherence, as well as people being able to address inequities, I think is really important. And I do think that it's really difficult, and that in terms of the remilitarization that we're seeing at the moment is one of the most frightening things. But this is something that movements such as degrowth actually have a lot of discussing to do about, because we've had non-violence and peace movements for generations, and at times they've been able to turn policies around. They've been able to show that public opinion is very much for us all just actually getting on with our lives rather than being drawn into wars. And I think that here degrowth makes advances in talking about collective provisioning rather than market-based and state-based sort of production and consumers, so that we're always put onto the back foot and having to plead to governments to do things. I might hand it over to you.
Yeah, I make it short because it's been a very long conversation, but the questions are great. So, yeah, first I think reflecting on all the three questions, I think what we have to reconstruct, and it's one of the key challenges for degrowth, which is about democracy. And there is no democracy without trust. It's to reconstruct trust in our societies. And this trust has been a construction in the last years by the far right, by the media, by the oligarchy. When you construct a type of society which is more and more divided, when you will put the responsibility of all your problems not on the system, but on a supposedly other type of part of the society. So it's the elite, it could be the migrants, it could be the liberals, it could be the Jews, it could be whatever you will find which would work. And type of fake sociological group of people. And it's even more violent nowadays that we are more and more enclosed in our small bubbles, because these phenomena are reinforced by the social medias and their algorithm, which were first optimized to have a more marketing advertisement profits. We are enclosing you into a type of small bubble when you will only connect with types of messages and people which fit with your values. And somehow we are well connected, and it was one of the promise of the social network world, but with people who are totally disconnected from each other. So you don't know anymore how to talk to your neighbor, where you're able to travel in the other part of the world and meet with people who share exactly the same values than you. And what we have to do is to go back to the territories through public services, which have to be re-questioned about their governance and their territoriality, through municipalist movements, and to reconnect with the people. Not to directly speak about what I think are my good values and to try to convince the other one about that, but first to listen. And first to see what we may have in common and on what we could cooperate. And the experience what we have in the village of Jambok, for example, with the farms, that you will see then that you have much more in common with people. That's what you think, where the whole system is pushing you to believe that they are enemies, that you should be afraid of that people. And it's to go back to the basics of how to live in a society where we are not living anymore in societies. And I think degrowth is really about that, and it will be my concluding word. Before reminding all of you for the fact that please make donation to Bolygó, and thanks a lot for more time for Bolygó to welcoming us for all the great things that you're doing here and so on. And you can also support them and support us by buying our beautiful t-shirts and books to explore even more degrowth. And the t-shirts are second-hand t-shirts that we printed ourselves with beautiful slogan and snails about degrowth. So thank you for joining tonight. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I did personally enjoy, and thanks Anitra, thanks Logan for this great time. But we stay here longer to keep on going and talk more about your fears and your hopes. So thank you very much, all of you.